Welcome to the EBPL podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hosick. 2 years ago, we brought you an important podcast series called Reclaiming the Lost Souls, where we spoke with people that were part of the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project who had uncovered important New Jersey history that everyone should know about. We're very excited to tell you that we're going to have a new episode coming up soon, but for this Black History Month, we wanted to remind you of this very important story. So enjoy this Encore presentation. Thank you for joining us for Reclaiming the Lost Souls, a limited podcast series brought to you by the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project and the East Brunswick Public Library. I am your host, Melissa Hosick. In this episode, we will learn more about the dark time in our local history, where free Black persons were forced into slavery and shipped from New Jersey to the Deep South. We'll also learn how we can help reclaim their names and tell their stories. I am joined by Tony and Jean Armstead, who are members of the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, indeed.
What is the purpose of the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project, and how did you learn about it?
Well, the Memorial Project is primarily to make sure that about 137 people who were removed from this area and sold into slavery in the South are remembered. We make sure that their names are spoken at least once a year. And the other part is to make sure that people remember that such a deed was undertaken.
The recitation of names is very powerful. If you can imagine, sort of related to what goes on in New York City on 9/11 each year to commemorate those who were lost in 2001. Just speaking the names and putting that memory out there for people, there's a feeling attached to it, and making sure that these people are not forgotten is what the bottom line of our project is. What we learned about this particular set of nefarious deeds of sending people into slavery in 1818 was that it was done within legal rights by two judges who decided in Middlesex County that this was a financially lucrative endeavor for them. And as a result, people who were freed and some were enslaved persons here in New Jersey, as I said, this was 1818, and people were convinced that by getting on a ship and going south, they could get a contract and make money that they weren't able to make as the North was becoming more industrialized and less agrarian. People who had been used to working with the cotton fields and sugarcane and tobacco fields in the South, some of whom had come north to seek industrial jobs, were anxious to earn money that they didn't find when they got to the North. And some were convinced that they could use their skills and get this money by going back south. And others were simply hijacked into following their children, who these judges said had agreed to leave New Jersey, not necessarily knowing where they were headed, but they had to agree to leave New Jersey.
The way that we learned about the project was a presentation that was given at one of our chapter meetings that identified the acts of this nefarious group. And my wife and I and several members of our chapter of the African American Historical and Genealogical Society were interested, attended the first recitation, and we were hooked.
I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I've never heard this story before. Were there laws in place to prevent forced slavery?
In 1808, the Congress of the United States outlawed international slave trade. So they were not receiving any more slaves from overseas officially. There were efforts being moved to ensure that those people who were enslaved had a gradual manumission process. So if they were born in a given year, some when they turned 21, that was usually the females, and 25 when they were males, would obtain their freedom, which basically meant that anybody who owned slaves at a point in time, that asset would no longer be available. And with the ability to get slaves being reduced, the folks in New Jersey had a need to find a way to take advantage of their current assets. And in part, that occurred in 1812 when the Jersey General Assembly passed a law saying anyone going back into slavery on a permanent basis and being removed from the state had to appear before two judges of the common court and state their agreement to be enslaved.
Were there individuals who held places of power in New Jersey who were responsible for the creation of this slave ring?
One of the people that appeared to have organized this band of kidnappers was a judge in Middlesex County, which gave him the ability, number one, to organize this whole process of trade and also to sit and make sure that it occurred as it was desired, because he was one of the judges of the Court of Common Pleas who would sit down and hear these people's admissions to return to slavery.
In some cases, children as young as 2 months old were deemed to have agreed to go south just because when they were asked by the judge or in the court, they cried, and that was stipulated as their agreement to be removed from the state. And their parents, in some cases, were told that, well, your child has agreed to be moved from the state, so we're going to do that. And if you want to stay with them, you need to agree as well. And that was the only way they were allowed to stay with their children.
And I don't think the age of consent was lower than 10. So they were sort of hog-tied into the process.
Why did Judge Van Wickle allow this to happen?
Well, one of the things that was occurring because the North was becoming more industrialized and agrarian, there were excess enslaved people. And if you were in the North and you had a slave and you went to sell that person, you get a price for them. But because there is much more demand in the South, if you could sell somebody up here for $50, you might be able to sell them down in the South for $250. Those are not accurate numbers, but it's just giving an idea of the impact the man had. And also, one of Judge Van Wickle's in-laws had a plantation in the South that needed people and came north with a bunch of money to populate his plantation. So it was mostly driven by money.
That is not a story I had heard until I began working here in East Brunswick. And that's a hard story to tell. Could you tell us more about how the Lost Souls Memorial Project was founded?
Well, the Lost Souls Memorial Project was originally formed as a committee of parties interested in exploring the possibility of removing Judge Jacob Van Wickle's name from a street because his name enjoys prominence around East Brunswick. And several people within the community, having heard this story of the slave ring, were appalled and went to the township to ask that this street that was named for Van Wickle have his name removed and be replaced with someone else's name. And the township did not vote on that, but eventually the community persons were encouraged to join hands around making a memorial to the people who were lost, as opposed to focusing on the judge, because he wasn't the only judge, although he had more attention drawn to him. So ultimately, the effort is to amplify these marginalized voices, to make sure that their names, as we said before, are spoken and that they don't become forgotten. And some of the organizations that got involved were the local NAACP, the Congregation of the Unitarian Society of East Brunswick, along with members of other faith congregations, some historians from Rutgers University, including Dr. Peter Kahn, he's in the science department, who is a long-term resident of East Brunswick. And he helped gather names on a petition to get the name of the street changed. And when that looked like it was not going to happen, it was his suggestion that we establish a memorial. And in the long run, the Council for the Humanities and the local politicians in East Brunswick were very supportive and helped develop the idea that this memorial could be right outside of the East Brunswick Community Arts Center. So there is now a plaque where that memorial will go. And we're in the process of finding out what that memorial will look like, but we do have a place to put it.
What other organizations are helping support and promote the project so it reaches a wider audience?
Well, as you're aware, we do have the support of the East Brunswick Public Library. Thank you. And
You're welcome.
And New Jersey Council for the Humanities has been very helpful, giving us a grant early on. And as I said, the Unitarian Society and HGS, African American Historical and Genealogical Society. And we are trying to see if we can, once we have this memorial established, if we can get it put on the state list. They're going to establish a trail throughout New Jersey of memorials that one can visit. And we're trying to make sure that Lost Souls gets to be on that list.
I know that you have a lot of young student activists who have become part of the project, and they did a lake walk. They also helped you with the display, and I believe there was a essay project.
Right, right. We had several high schoolers became involved. The East Brunswick Youth Council is working with the arts department to help us get the word out. And they've made such unbelievable posters that are going to be displayed within the library for the month of February to help commemorate Black History Month. And we have several youth who speak very eloquently about the history of Van Wickle slave ring and can tell it just as well as any of the adults in our committee can.
That's important. Keeping these names and bringing them back to life where they belong back in our community is a very important part of this history.
You had mentioned that it was something that you had not heard about in your education or anyplace else. And we're finding that there's a lot of history that was not taught incorrectly, it just wasn't mentioned. And Van Wickle has popped up several times in newspaper articles of various books, but it's like someone shouting in the wind. It was identified and then it was just gone. And we're hoping that with the memorial, it will be shouted and stay there.
And we do have a faction of our committee that's working on developing a curriculum. Right now, we're concentrating on middle and high school level children. Our educational guru, Crystal Langford, is working on getting a curriculum that will be tried, I'll say, in the high schools, hopefully by the spring. And so that we can make sure that the students coming up behind us do hear about this part of our history. One of the things that Dr. Peter Kahn is very adamant about is making sure that the United States kind of join in making the relevance of our real history evident and available to our youth, as opposed to what we've done in the past, which is picking and choosing what we want to have remembered and what we don't want to have remembered.
I believe that Stowe Langford will be talking more to us about the project and the educational component.
Yes, that's correct. And she will give a more clear picture of what the people were doing, who these people were, who were these lost souls, how did they get involved, how did they get kidnapped or duped into getting on these ships, what was it like, what was life like in New Jersey at that time, what was life like on those ships, and what happened when they got off in Louisiana and Mississippi or wherever they got off.
If people are really moved, and I hope they are by this episode, how can they get involved with the project?
Well, we are hoping that people can offer their time and talents as well as their treasures, their funds, to help us when possible. Currently, the most important thing is to get the word out. Listeners may want to check out the displays at the library throughout the month of February. We're commemorating Black History Month and highlighting the Lost Souls Memorial Project, including those wonderful posters developed by the students. Of course, our fundraising campaign is ongoing, and on our website, people can check a box and donate if they like, or just check the website to see what upcoming events are happening, including in May, we will be having our 5th annual recitation of the names, and the details are still being worked out. We just know that it's going to be in May. And we're raising funds for the memorial itself. For more information and to get facts about how to help, listeners can go to the website. It's lostsoulsmemorialnj.org. And what they can find is the history of how we got started. All of our events will be posted there. We participated, for example, in East Brunswick Day, and we had the youth show their posters around the lake at the library. And the East Brunswick Library occasionally has programs that allow us to participate in getting the word out to the community.
And there's also a spot on there where you can ask questions or make comments to the board. And if you have an interest, ask us a question. We try to make sure that if anyone has a concern or question that we can answer it and reach out for people individually.
We also have a button there if anyone is interested or knows of someone who creates memorials, or if you have an idea for what you'd like to see in the way of a memorial, we do have a button there that encourages information of that sort.
Tony and Jean, thank you for helping us shine light on this story to recover these lost souls, and I look forward to the next episode.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you for joining us for Reclaiming the Lost Souls, a limited podcast series brought to you by the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project and the East Brunswick Public Library. I am your host, Melissa Hosick. In this episode, we will learn more about those who were forced into slavery and shipped to the Deep South, and why sharing their stories through our education system is very important. If you have not yet listened to our first episode, we would recommend doing so, as it will give you some continuity and context. Just scroll back in your feed or click on the link in our show notes. Now, enjoy the show. I am joined by Crystal Langford, who is the public historian and curriculum developer of the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project. Thank you for joining us, Crystal.
Thank you for having me.
How did you become involved in the project?
The Lost Souls Public Memorial Project, we're actually looking for someone to develop educational materials that would actually appeal to all audiences. I'm the doctoral student at Rutgers. My former professor, Dr. Dan Beatty, he actually forwarded this flyer to my dissertation chair, Dr. Ben Justice, who conducted a writing group that I was a part of. I remember reading the flyer and reaching out to Ben and telling him that I think I can do this. And he actually affirmed. He's like, yeah, I think you can. You should go ahead and submit your application. So I submitted my CV and I was selected to steer the educational aspect of the project. Like you and many others, I was unaware about this local history and on a larger scale, New Jersey history. With New Jersey, we tend to sweep our history under the rug when it comes to its involvement in enslavement or the slave industry. In order for me to develop the curriculum, I needed to engross myself in this history. When I initially came on, I only came on as a curriculum developer. Because of my knowledge about the history, I became the public historian. As it would play out, my own doctoral research at Rutgers is a historical one. So I use the skill set that I acquired as a doctoral student and apply it in my research for the Lost Souls. And I'm not claiming that I was the one who discovered this. I was just continuing the narrative that others presented, like James Gicatino, who's also a historian, Calvin Schermerhorn, among many others who began this narrative talking about Van Wickle and the slave ring in particular. However, unlike my predecessors, I came in telling the story from a different lens.
In episode 1, we learned about how forced slavery began here in New Jersey legally in the 1800s. Can you tell us more about the 137 souls that were lost?
I can actually answer this question in two ways when we're talking about the lost souls and in terms of how we come to define them. The first way actually to define the lost souls, they were individuals, human beings whose hopes and dreams of freedom, perhaps for themselves, but definitely for their children, exchanged for as little as $150. So the lost souls did not choose to do this on their own. In many cases that they were coerced. To answer that question in terms of a lot of people really want to know who were they? Who were they? So the second way I define the lost souls is that it's actually in the context of community. They were at least 137. I say at least because we're still looking for some that may have been sold south. So they were at least 137 human beings who were separated from the larger community, be it local, Middlesex County, or statewide, New Jersey, and they were sent to the Deep South. These individuals were mothers, they were fathers, they were brothers, sisters, who experienced the same things that we experience. And besides family separation, in some instances, you may have some families here in the state of New Jersey that are experiencing that now, but they experience the same things that we're experiencing: the birth of someone, the transitioning of a loved one through death, the joining of families through marriage and birthdays of children. I also think about the lost souls. I conceptualize them in this way, thinking about the milestones. If you have an infant, birth to 12 months, introducing to solid foods, that excitement that you get, seeing your baby taking their first steps or saying their first words. And although they did this on a slide, definitely learning how to read, showing their parents new tricks. When I think about the lost souls, this is what I think about. The things that we take for granted. This is what was stolen from them. This is what was lost. When we're talking about the lost souls, we're not just focused on the physical aspect of removal, but lost memories that were created and memories that were to be created that were lost. So that's how it's defined. I define it in those two ways.
Why did you choose to center the lost souls in the story of interstate slave trade?
I chose to center them because I wanted to ensure that their voices were heard. And what I mean by that is that when we're looking at historians who are writing histories about enslavement, they talk about the things that happened to enslaved people as opposed to the ways in which enslaved people made their presence known and resisted or rejected what was actually happening to them. So when I approached this work, I wanted to make sure that this was key, the act of resistance, them groaning, telling court collectors, hey, listen, I was kidnapped. I was brought here against my will. All of these little pieces, tidbits are in the historical records, but it's not documented that way. So I just wanted to make sure. Black history is often written as it's a forgotten history or an erased history, some aspects of it. The case of the lost souls, it wasn't necessarily an erased history per se or forgotten history, but it was more so an uncovered history. And what I mean is that when historians are looking at the work and they're writing their stories, they're glossing over this resistance that is taking place. They're glossing over the ways African Americans or enslaved people in general are making their presence known. So I just wanted to ensure that this history is brought to the forefront. How do we differentiate between an uncovered history versus an erased history? Is that, well, let me just put it in concrete terms. When we're looking at Van Wickle, that history, we're attempting to erase that history. We're attempting to erase his misdeeds. We want to just put out the good things that he's done. Oh, he was a judge in Middlesex County. That's a good thing. That's an honorable thing. However, this thing that he did that he didn't want people to know, okay, well, let's go ahead and erase that. And as a result, it's forgotten in our memories, as opposed to this history that was actually never brought to the forefront. So bringing this to the forefront, we're uncovering these stories. And I think it's great actually for education, for students to actually pay attention to signs in their community, road, street signs, names of buildings, and start thinking about who these people were and what were their deeds. And are we erasing this history? And the people that, if they did oppress anyone, are we overlooking their story? So that's why I actually chose to center the lost souls.
These stories were clearly hidden from our educational system in my generation. What implications does this now have for the education of our youth?
So the implication is that it becomes a more complete narrative of America. It's not a revisionist history, but a more accurate history. Telling the lost souls and other stories of enslavement in New Jersey allows for the telling of the story of America from multiple perspectives. Will it be all roses? No. So there's beauty in it in terms of telling this story. So we can see how democracy is moving forward through this push. There's this wrong that's taken place, and you have individuals fighting against this wrong. So if you're in an oppressed group or a marginalized group, you're experiencing oppression and pushing that back and bringing that to light so that others learn about it, others see it, and then laws, they change the ways of doing things in order to make America what it was intended to become.
I will be linking all of your educational materials and resources you've developed for the Lost Souls in the show notes. Crystal, thank you for helping us on this journey to recover the lost souls.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to episode 3 of Reclaiming the Lost Souls, a limited series podcast brought to you by the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project and the East Brunswick Public Library. I am your host, Melissa Hozick. In this episode, we present an audio tour of the project's Black History Month display, which is currently on view at the library, as well as some essays from young voices in our community.
Welcome to the East Brunswick Public Library Black History Month Display 2022. My name is Tony Armstead. I am a member of the Lost Souls Memorial Project, and I will be taking you on a short tour of the display. When you enter the main doors of the library and proceed to the right toward the information desk, you'll see a few clothing items hanging over the display cases, depicting the colorful kente cloth and animal prints so associated with African heritage. In the first display case are artifacts enamored of the African American culture, family Bibles in which were kept dates and records well into the 20th century, wooden carvings of African culture, handmade tambourines, often used to accompany hymn singing in church services, books and newspapers depicting times of enslavement and beginnings of protests against this practice. The central display case holds anti-slavery memorabilia. A statuette of Frederick Douglass with a small boy illustrates the importance of education. Pictures of Abraham Lincoln are surrounded by several Black leaders of the time: Frederick Douglass, John Brown, Harriet Tubman, and also an unidentified Black Union soldier. There is also an example of the racist propaganda circulated in the mid-19th century and a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation. Also, on the bottom shelf, there is an encyclopedia collection and a photographic history of the Civil War. The third display case contains modern-day reflections of where we've come from and where we're going, including an authentic signature from Dr. Martin Luther King. A newspaper reflects the election of Barack Obama, America's first president of African descent. Popular books of the 20th centuries and 20th and 21st centuries, and a commemorative mug from the Smithsonian Institution's National African American Museum of History and Culture, which just opened in the 21st century. There are also books encouraging folks to find their roots. Continuing through the library, on the wall in the opposite section near the passports window is a beautiful painting by local artist Veronica Sproul. It's entitled "Grow Where Planted and Bloom with Grace." Veronica is a talented artist who lives in Hillsborough, and she graciously loaned her work to the library for this month's display. Another beautiful art piece, a rendering of the much-beloved, very talented musician Mr. Stevie Wonder, is also on loan from the collection of East Brunswick resident Mayvonia Caldwell. Between these two pieces of art is a carved piece of driftwood. A face has been carved in and polished to a smooth finish. The black, white, and gold poster above and to the right was created by a member of the East Brunswick Youth Council, explaining the reason for the memorial. I'll read you what it says. The Souls. 137 African Americans kidnapped into permanent slavery. We won't let history forget them. Men and women of all ages, as well as children as young as just a few days old. Men and women of all ages, as well as children just a few days old, are included among its victims. It is our intention and our obligation to make every effort to honor their humanity as individuals with stories and realities, helping to remember them fully. On the far wall, adjacent to the meeting room's hallway, you will find additional Youth Council renderings in honor of the Lost Souls Project. 4 posters explaining the injustices that were done, and 2 with artwork submitted in response to a contest held last year. The entire collection of art and essays were exhibited around the East Brunswick Municipal Pond in October of 2021. The names around the borders depict the known victims and ages of the kidnapped. In closing, I'd like to quote two persons who are strongly related to this project and to the retention of Black history. The first one is from a book entitled Finding Your Roots by Henry Louis Gates, Jr. Truth for our nation and for ourselves is in the search, while freedom and empowerment are found in choosing what to do with truths once revealed. And I'd like to also read an excerpt from chapter 10 of the well-known book Uncle Tom's Cabin, written in 1852 by Harriet Beecher Stowe. In order to appreciate the sufferings of the Negroes sold South, it must be remembered that all the instinctive affections of that race are peculiarly strong. Their local attachments are very abiding. They are not naturally daring and enterprising, but home-loving and affectionate. And to this, all the terrors with which ignorance invests the unknown. And add to this, again, that selling to the South is set before the Negro from childhood as the last severity of punishment. The threat that terrifies more than whipping or torture of any kind is the threat of being sent downriver. We have ourselves heard this feeling expressed by them and seen the unaffected horror with which they will sit in their gossiping hours and tell frightful stories of that downriver, which to them is that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler ever returns.
Tony invited artist Veronica Spruill to talk more about her art piece in the exhibit.
The piece that I submitted for display is entitled Grow Where Planted and Bloom with Grace. And it is undoubtedly one of my favorite pieces that I've created to date. And the reason behind it is because I just truly love the message that it conveys. All of my artwork I like to base in positivity, but this one I just like how it's more than one subject. It's a group of people coming together, helping each other in a community effort and growing from that moment. And I truly hope that as a viewer, one could appreciate that message and maybe even inspires them to do the same. Make sure we're helping our brothers and sisters along the way as we go on this journey we call life. What role does art play in community? Personally, as an artist and just a creative being in general, I truly believe that art has major influence when it comes to community. I believe that just looking at a piece, it can move you from within. My goal as an artist is to inspire my community. I want to create work that gives people hope, courage to push on, and excitement. I believe that art can influence in many ways, but for me, primarily, I wanted to influence my community in positive ways to make a difference.
In 2021, the East Brunswick Public Library partnered with the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project to celebrate the diversity of our community and the sense of unity we feel with others. They hope to memorialize those who were kidnapped to permanent slavery in the Deep South. We sponsored an essay contest for teenagers in our community, and we are excited to share some of the submissions here.
Hi, my name is Priya, and I submitted one of the essays for the teen contest. Social media is one of the biggest parts of any teenager's life. They can communicate with their friends through it, share interests with others, find entertainment, and can share bits of their life through the app, especially during COVID-19. Many this past year have relied on social media to perceive a sense of normalcy. The compulsion many have in social media is mainly rooted in the need to have a distraction or something to do whilst the world around them is in disarray. From VSCO, Instagram, Snapchat to TikTok, the options of social media are endless, yet they all contribute to one thing universally, the beauty standard. The beauty standard is a social requirement women are expected to fulfill in order to thrive in being feminine, whether it be for oneself or for others. This high expectancy of how teen girls should look can be located with a simple swipe onto social media. Many of the popular users seen on these apps can sometimes lead young, influential teenagers to start comparing themselves to their favorites on the app platform. From models to celebrities, girls are exposed from a young age to this concept and are expected to live up to it. They are criticized, critiqued, and held to higher standards than others. This can be detrimental to their health, both physically and mentally, of those girls as their idealistic expectations move farther away from reality. The harm can especially come towards young women of color. Women of color have always been under scrutiny in the realm of beauty for not adopting the standard picture of beauty. All of this is seen on social media. The likes, comments, and compliments have underlying meanings that make it seem as if one is not enough unless they fit the expected. Young women of color biologically have different ethnic features that do not match those here. When one cannot change or modify themselves to fit into the standard, it can cause many insecurities. As written by Colorado EDU, while many women lack beauty when compared against this unattainable and narrow ideal, women of color experience the most subjugation. In order to achieve the homogenic, Eurocentric beauty ideal, women are encouraged to alter their natural looks through cosmetic surgeries and products. This beauty standard includes being light-skinned, meaning certain body type requirements or having specific body proportions, and more. These standards are vastly different from the requirements elsewhere. The beauty standard has mainly been influenced by European and Western, as well as Northwestern ideals and culture. As stated by Slice, the Northwest also happens to be the countries with the most power and influence, and this makes it irrefutably about race. Light skin has always been the highest perceivable form of beauty, and you can see this by looking through history, such as during the Renaissance era in Northern Europe and the Victorian era in England. Ivory and pale skin were seen as the supreme skin tone. Even now, people use skin whitening techniques in order to have a more mainstream appearance. When the media decides what is beautiful and what is not, many are going to want to keep up with the highest perceived appearance to get the validation they want from themselves and others. Whilst trying to achieve the level of beauty they desire, many teen minorities can develop mental health problems that hurt them. They can be a risk factor for mental health problems such as poor quality of life, psychological distress, and unhealthy behavior. The British Psychological Society. These disorders are extremely prevalent on young people of color as the standard is unattainable and unreachable for them unless they want to take to just drastically changing who they are. When one cannot change or modify themselves to fit into the standard, it can cause insecurities within themselves. As claimed by Women's Health, girls and women with negative thoughts and feelings about their bodies are more likely to develop certain mental health conditions, such as eating disorders and depression. Being beautiful is so important to youngins that they are willing to risk their life for it. The standard is only being amplified and becoming louder to hear through social media, which in turn only makes it clear what they themselves deem to be missing to be beautiful. As somewhat a part of the generation in which your beauty is stigmatized by others, the feeling of not fitting in or not looking like others on social media is incredibly damaging and hurtful. When I was younger, I would only see celebrities with feminine faces and feminine features. As a South Asian, I naturally have more masculine or less feminine features on my face. When looking on social media, feminine features are considered to be beautiful. This impacted my mentality as a teenage girl. I went through what so many other young girls of color have gone through and experienced. Not having someone to look up to as an inspiration for confidence is harmful even now. Even with new faces on social media, such as Amita Suman from Shadow and Bone or Mayatri Ramakrishnan from Never Have I Ever, you still do not get the representation one might want or need. Now we see ideas of more inclusivity. From musicians like Lizzo to models like Winnie Harlow, the census of what is considered pretty is moving forward. That does not take away from the fact that the standard is still racist. It only caters to a specific group of people who are deemed as better than others. But there is still a lack of representation. With a lack of representation in the media of ethnic beauty, it is easy to see how forgotten women of color must feel in a world of westernized culture. The beauty standard has and will always be detrimental to women of color. Its internalized racism is evident, and the expectations are not changing anytime soon. The use of social media only accelerates and spreads the standard like a wildfire. It is important to recognize that it is imperative to change the standard to make all people from all walks of life feel beautiful in a world that may tell you you're not.
This essay was written by Mary H. and read by Puri Mehta. A broader knowledge of history propels us to reckon with the community's past and move forward to a more equitable society is by how we can learn from Jacob Van Wickle's mistakes and how what he did was wrong and inappropriate. Then by how we can change our perspective and point of views. And finally, we can take what we have learned from the past and make a better future with everyone's thoughts in mind. One example of how a broader knowledge of history propels us to reckon with the community's past and move forward to a more equitable society is by how we can learn from Jacob Van Wickle's mistakes and what they did was wrong and inappropriate. One reason that a broader knowledge of history propels us to reckon with our community's past and move forward to create a more equitable society is by how we can learn from their mistakes and what they did that was wrong and inappropriate. When we learn from their mistakes, we won't do them again, and we will grow from them. For example, when Jacob Van Wickle abused his authority and power for his own selfish desires, the people in the town had no idea he was doing this until many years later when there was nothing we could do to save those people. But what we can do is look out for signs to make sure that people in power are not abusing the authority for their own benefit. Another example is that when Jacob Van Wickle mistreated others because of what he knew from the past of slavery and injustice, instead of growing into the future and becoming more open-minded, but how these people are not terrible just because of the color of their skin. He stayed right back in the past, bringing so many people, many of whom were children, back to square one with no more freedom and no more future for their young children. But what we can do instead is look at everyone through blind eyes. Therefore, we can treat everyone with kindness and then expect the same in return. After we have learned from Van Wickle's mistakes and what he did that was wrong and inappropriate, and move on to changing our own perspectives and point of views to be open-minded and accommodate everybody. Another example of history propels us to reckon with the community's past and move forward to a more equitable society is by changing our perspectives and point of views. One example is that when we change our perspectives and point of views, we can view everybody respectfully and by what their personality is like, and not by what they look like or by the color of their skin. Each and every person is unique in their own set of talents and deserve to be treated as such, no matter their race or ethnicity. The way Van Wickle viewed it was through cloud glasses when he was only blinded by his own beliefs and not about how those beliefs may affect those around him, or if he did. He simply had his pride in the way of what really mattered, making sure his power is used to represent the people of the country and the state, not only for himself. Another example is that we can see the intolerant point of views in history. We can have better point of views for the future and for right now. That's why the final step to create a better future bit by bit from what we have learned from history and each other. Last but not least, a broader knowledge of history propels us to reckon with the community's past and move forward to a more equitable society by taking what we have learned from the past and make a better future with everyone's thoughts in mind. One example of this is by how we can review what exactly went wrong in the past that caused this event to happen. In this case, it was having the wrong people in power that caused this outcome. We can fix this by having those who are eligible to vote research who they plan to elect before electing them. This way, we can elect people who have a better past to help create a better future for us. Another example is that we can do our best to treat everyone equally. Even though the world is not perfect and never will be, if each one of us individually treats everyone the way we want to be treated, the positivity will block out the negativity and will spread like wildfire. In closing, a broader knowledge of history propels us to reckon with the community's past and move forward to a more equitable society is by how we can learn from Jacob Van Wickle's mistakes and by how what he did that was wrong and inappropriate, and by how we can change our perspectives and point of views, and finally, we take what we have learned from the past and make a better future with everyone's thoughts in mind.
This teen essay was written by Mahik H. and read by Daniel Yu. It is part of human nature to judge people and label them based on certain factors, such as race, gender, financial situation, appearance, etc. There are certain marginalized groups, however, that are viewed in a negative manner and targeted due to negative stereotypes. One such marginalized group is impoverished people, who are constantly treated in a different manner because of their socioeconomic status. The reason those stereotypes have formed is because people view them with a certain prejudice that is predetermined. They may believe that they are unsanitary or just simply below them all because they don't share the same financial situation. What people don't realize is that they're judging a certain group without knowing the facts first and causing negative results. Stereotypes for impoverished people create conditions or surveillance and censorship, which result in social exclusion and lack of respect, causing a further divide between economic classes. When people from low-income families are stereotyped based on their socioeconomic status, they are viewed in a certain light that results in social exclusion. Not only do they feel like they do not belong, but they feel as if they are separated from the rest of society. Since they don't share the same experiences as their wealthier peers, they feel socially isolated internally. This internal isolation and sense of not belonging stems from the stereotypes that are associated with impoverished people. A situation that exemplifies the internal social exclusion that low-income people feel is the strangers, my new classmates, swap stories of summer fun, multi-week trips abroad, fancy parties at summer homes, courtside seats at professional basketball games. I tried to think of a story that I could add. The only family vacations I had known were drives up I-95 from Miami to a cousin's house in Georgia. These rich kids had their own version of summer. They know that they will instantly be judged or met with the stereotype that it's normal for them to experience less. The scrutiny that they would face from their peers, along with the pity, creates conditions of censorship for low-income people. They don't contribute to conversations since they are cautious that their responses will either be met with pity or scorn. They know that children from lower-income families are regarded as having been scarred by poverty with all its familiar ills, including a lack of social and academic preparation for college life. Since they are viewed in a certain light, in situations such as attending college, they are immediately stereotyped as scarred by poverty, and thus excluded from the rest of the applicants. When people view impoverished people in a negative light before they even know them, they feel different and feel as if they don't belong. This contributes to impoverished people being insecure about themselves and thus censoring their responses in order to prevent more prejudice. This distinction between different economic classes causes a further divide between socio-economic classes, since impoverished people view themselves as different and are socially excluded from the rest of society. The isolation of different groups based on their socio-economic status creates more separation and lack of unity in the nation. Due to impoverished people being stereotyped in a negative way, they are often treated with a lack of respect, further magnifying the gap between socio-economic classes. Stereotypes to low-income families being dirty or inferior are some examples that led to impoverished people being treated with lack of respect. Most people form a single story, one viewpoint that dictates the stereotype that they associate with a certain group of people that affects their actions. Novelist Chimamanda Adichie explains, "All I heard about was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story for them." Similar to that example, when people form a negative single story about a certain group of people, such as impoverished people, they treat them with a lack of respect and view them as inferior. They aren't exposed to other viewpoints and stereotyped impoverished people based on what they previously saw or heard. This view in impoverished people censoring their responses to avoid being viewed as even more different. In addition to this, the way people view impoverished people due to the difference in wealth greatly contributes to how they are treated with a lack of respect. Ava DuVernay's documentary noted laws were passed that regulated African Americans to a permanent second-class status. Just like how African Americans were viewed as inferior and treated with a lack of respect due to their race, impoverished people are treated as if they are inferior due to their socioeconomic status. Due to the difference in wealth, similar to the difference in skin color, impoverished people are treated in an inferior manner. This greatly contributes to the disparity between different economic classes in America, since the perspective of people is not something that can be changed easily. The attitude of people towards certain groups creates an even greater division between different economic classes. In summation, the negative stereotypes that impoverished people are subjected to create conditions of surveillance and censorship that lead to social exclusion and a lack of respect. This further contributes to the widening gap between socioeconomic classes. When they feel as if they are closely monitored and judged, impoverished people censor their responses to avoid being singled out for being different. This leads to internal isolation and thus social exclusion, along with the feeling of not belonging for low-income individuals. Stereotypes play a prominent role in this because they create predetermined prejudices in people's mind which affect their attitude and actions. Along with feeling social exclusion, impoverished people are also treated with a lack of respect due to the demeaning stereotypes that they are associated with. This results in them being treated in an inferior manner and viewed negatively, further creating the conditions of surveillance and censorship. All of this plays a role in separating people and dividing the nation, rather than bridging the already prominent gap between different economic classes.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Reclaiming the Lost Souls. Check out our previous episodes at ebpl.org/podcast, and we will see you next week. Thank you for joining us for Reclaiming the Lost Souls, a limited podcast series brought to you by the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project and the East Brunswick Public Library. I am your host, Melissa Hozick. In this episode, we speak with two of the founding members of the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project as they look back to its beginnings and their hopes for the future. We also share more teen essays from our contest. If you haven't listened to our past episodes, please do. This journey is complex, and having the context is important. Just scroll back in your feed or click the link in our show notes. Now, enjoy the show. I am joined by Mavonia Caldwell and Peter Kahn, trustees of the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Melissa.
Good to be with you.
Previously in episode 1, we learned how both of you helped form this project after trying to have Van Wickle Road's name changed. Where did you learn about this story of forced slavery in East Brunswick, and what inspired you to help create this project and bring awareness?
Peter, how did you hear about it?
People at the Unitarian Society heard about it while I was overseas in the summer of 2017. So when I came back, there were a few people, the minister and one or two others, who were aware of it. They told me, and the decision was made to appeal to the town council to rename Van Wickle Road. But I realized that in 1818, when the ring was discovered, there was outrage and stories in the newspapers of the time. But soon thereafter, the whole thing was forgotten. So I thought, what would happen if we were to win and the township renamed the road? It might again be forgotten, just as it was 200 years ago. So the idea occurred to build a permanent physical memorial. And I wrote a one-pager for the back of the piece of paper that we submitted to the town council for the petition to rename the road, outlining the idea of having a memorial. And that led to the Lost Souls Project.
And I really heard about Van Wickle and the slavery ring a few years ago. We had a son who was in school here, but it was not taught as part of New Jersey history. And when we found out that there was this slave ring, we became interested, but it really never went anywhere until we came up with the idea that Peter's already mentioned. We just stewed about it and were concerned about it, and particularly concerned that Van Wickle was never prosecuted or in any way had to lose any of his wealth or his position.
Behind it for me was the fact that I had just come home from a visit to Germany. We have friends there. And we visited both Berlin and Frankfurt. And in Berlin, of course, I saw the Holocaust Memorial and several other memorials, which are quite striking. The German government has done a good job of trying to make sure people don't forget that. But in Frankfurt, a friend of ours helped us find the gravestones of a cousin of my grandfather by the name of Karl Kahn. Karl served in World War I in the German army and won the Iron Cross, which is the German equivalent of the Medal of Honor. He became a physician and a very well-known figure in Frankfurt, deeply involved in civic affairs for a long, long time. When the Nazis took over, they revoked his license to practice medicine on anybody other than a Jew. I'm of Jewish ancestry. And after a while, they revoked his license to practice on anybody, and they took his house, making him accept a lower price than the buyer was willing to pay. Sometime thereafter, they sent him and his wife a letter telling them the date on which they would be deported. By this time, they knew what the deportation meant. And so instead of letting the Nazis kill them, they committed suicide with what was then called prussic acid, now cyanide. We visited their gravestones in the Frankfurt cemetery, and they're unusual. Rectangular blocks of blue and white marble with the usual dates of birth and death on it. And Karl's wife, Jenny, coincidentally, the same name as my wife. On the bottom of these gravestones in Hebrew is engraved, "They liberated themselves in death." Those gravestones are reserved for people who committed suicide that way. And they're scattered, sprinkled all over the cemetery. That brought me home, and when I came home with that in my head.
Yeah. And remembrance is a duty of those of us who remain. Unfortunately, unless we bring out true history, then remembrance does not occur. Because even in some of the township papers, Van Wickle is mentioned along with James Morgan. They are just listed as good citizens, good businessmen, upstanding citizens. That's how we have, even within this town, we have General James Morgan and Van Wickle established a pottery business. And we hear, even in our community, unless we tell the story that, yes, they were very good businessmen. However, it was often on human flesh. And we have to know that business is not the only responsibility of good citizens.
The project has been an undertaking with many goals. What are you currently focused on, and what do you hope to accomplish in the future?
It's education for me of all of the many goals that we have, which of course include building a memorial, uniting the community within that process. But I think if I had to pick just one thing or a priority, it would be to have the community, and particularly its young people, recognize what true history means, what inclusive history means, and the fact that just because you didn't break it, it's your responsibility to help fix it when you see that there is a problem. And I think it has been instructive to see how a community of very different people, volunteers, have come together in a united cause from their different perspectives and decided together that a community is worth the truth. And that's one of the reasons I'm happy to be here with Peter today.
When I became involved, my initial focus was get a physical memorial up there with names on it and details. And over time, it's shifted. I see the educational program as the key and the physical memorial as one of the tools in that program. But what has happened to me over the time since 2017, when I became involved, when the project started, it is surprising. Here I am at the age of 81, well-educated as people go in this country. And I have never before had close, continuous working relationships with Black people. I've worked with Black people. Having Black students is not the same as working as a co-equal with people of very different background from mine. And so some, virtually all of the Black people with whom I've had to work, not to mention the white ones, they have become dear to me, friends, people with whom I would enjoy having dinner once this damn pandemic is over. And it's odd and unfortunate that it should have taken me until I'm 81 for this to happen. And I can only hope that the inclusiveness we're trying to develop and foster can be spread.
And it appears to be with the young people. That's why there's such a hope. They have jumped into working on the project, on their walk and learn, on their posters, and just their energy around having the right history, unerasing history, and being a part of some of the solutions. That is so gratifying. And I think that when people talk to each other, they will find similarities, or at least there's a possibility when they do.
As Shylock said in The Merchant of Venice, if you tickle us, do we not laugh? And if you prick us, do we not bleed?
I think a lot of what's happening now around the country, and Black History Month, I've seen celebrated in more ways than ever this year, whether it's in the media, whether it's speeches, events of various kinds. I think that some of the move toward seeing people as being worthy, equally worthy, different but worthy. And when we come to that realization, then I think it behooves us to treat them differently and to remember those who were not treated as worthy. We have 137 souls who we know can document fully that they were taken inhumanely. And that's really one of the things that we feel strongly about in the memorial. It is, Van Wickle was here, he did whatever he did, but there were people here whose lives were totally disrupted and worsened by having been shipped away. And I think that when we focus on that, it's easy to feel that there should be some redress, that we should care about that. This is our town, and they walked these streets at one time. And some of them should still have people here who are their descendants. And that was not allowed to happen.
One of the things that sticks in my mind all the time is that the thugs who marched in Charlottesville a year or two ago ostensibly were defending the culture of the Confederacy, defending Confederate monuments. But that's not at all what they were defending. They were defending white supremacy, the idea that white men should be entitled to rule over everything. Those thugs at night, when they marched with their tiki torches, chanted, "Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." And if they were to come to power, or people like them, it would only be a matter of time before they would come for people like me.
Well, they've come already for people like me.
And you too, and you too. And so I fear for my grandchildren and yours.
One of our goals with this series, beyond sharing the story, was to encourage those who are so moved to become involved. What areas of volunteers are you currently looking for, and who can participate?
Anybody.
Everybody.
Yes, the more people, the better. We have bandwidth problems because we are a small group. And as we now have just got our 501c3 status, we're going to be moving into judging candidates for the structure of the memorial. We're going to be moving into massive fundraising and all sorts of community events. We need people of all kinds, and they do not have to come from East Brunswick. They can come from anywhere that they wish. We meet as a group on the first Tuesday of the month at 7 o'clock. It's easy enough to find us on the web. We have a website, and you can find us there and get the details for participating on Tuesday as a start, and then join up. Help us, and you'll have fun, as I am.
And there is work to be done. We have people who have skills in media, communications, fundraising. So bring your skills. And if you feel that you'd like to bone up on your skills, there will be people who can guide you through the process of serving. I can't imagine that anybody who's interested in this project wouldn't find lots of work to do to help us move it forward.
We'll keep you off the streets and out of the bars.
I don't know, Peter. Let's not promise too much.
Well, that's if we don't drive you into them.
The website is lostsoulsmemorialnj.org, correct?
That's correct. And a lot of additional information while you're deciding how to be a part of us. The website is very clear about even more of the history than Peter and I could tell you about today. It gives you the background and makes it clear and gives you comfort in knowing that we have well researched the work that we're putting out there. So we invite you in any case to view the website, share it with family and friends, and join up.
A point to be made here is that for the 137 people that we've identified, there has been thorough research into records that were contemporaneous with the shipping of these folks south. We have a researcher and her staff who are absolutely superb. They have documented everything with contemporaneous records. So when we have the name of somebody who's one of the lost souls, we know we have it right.
And it's really chilling when you see a name and an age of people who are on manifest lists, when you know that there were men who were able-bodied and adult, when you know that there were mothers with children as young as 2 days old, when you know also that not only were people shipped away through Sandy Hook and through the Perth Amboy ports, there was a coffle. Now that's a word I didn't even know until a few years ago, which included people who walked, who were chained together and who walked from New Jersey to at least Alabama and maybe beyond into Louisiana and Mississippi. I'm sure that they started out with the most strong and able people. And I don't know that we know how many people from the coffle made it to their final destination for walking. So we both shipped and marched people in line for this person who was, quote, a judge and a good businessman.
And when people got down to work on plantations as slaves, their life expectancy was short. The areas were malarial, and so you inevitably got malaria, which could kill you over time. I've had malaria from when I lived in Africa. It is not fun. The food was insufficient to maintain health. The living conditions were execrable. So the life expectancy under hard labor with an overseer with a whip, if you didn't move fast enough, was not high. Imagine a family here in New Jersey. A man leaves his house to go to work that day, slave or free, and doesn't come back. And there's an empty seat at the dinner table that night.
And a hole in your heart forever.
Mavonia and Peter, thank you for helping us reclaim the lost souls.
Thank you, Melissa. It's an important reclamation process. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
In our previous episode, we highlighted some of the submissions in our teen essay contest, and we share the rest of them here.
This teen essay was written by Diane Zisi and read by Karen Tong. Thinking back on history, there have been multiple times communities have been unified as a whole due to their circumstances. A great example of this is the Lost Souls Public Memorial Project. Not only does this project discuss a self-interested judge, It also speaks about the many free lives sold into slavery in New Jersey. This historical happening triggered the citizens of Middlesex County to stand together as one. On November 5, 1818, the citizens of Middlesex County positioned themselves to bring an end to this kidnapping. Individuals were to be fined or imprisoned if found to be associated with this unjust transportation system of free African Americans. Although laws were set in place, another group was sent into slavery just 2 days later. This truly shows how little they cared about the law and the lives of other fellow citizens. In later state history, there were other occurrences of racial oppression. Moreover, civilians in the state of New Jersey, when legislative and executive forces have failed to protect minority groups. For instance, the 1923 Battle of Perth Amboy involved a crowd of 6,000 Perth Amboy residents rioting against the local Ku Klux Klan chapter. In the New York Times newspaper, it states the townspeople stood their ground before the hall, in which about 150 Klansmen were still penned. This exhibits how they stood their ground and went against what was morally wrong. These events encouraged people to now stand up for what they believe. In recent events, many people have stood up against the political and societal oppressions to bring awareness to the injustices that racial minorities face, especially African Americans. As history correlates with future actions, activists seek to ensure history does not repeat itself. The Black Lives Matter movement combats racism by organizing civil protests. To conclude, society should learn from the mistakes of previous systems that resulted from internal biases and racist beliefs. Only with communities learning from the past will they be able to patch up the harm left by outdated oppressive structures.
This teen essay was written by Ruby A. and read by Charita Nanapaneni. 1818, in which was the year where 137 African Americans were kidnapped into the Van Wickle slave ring and sent from East Brunswick, New Jersey to permanent slavery in the Deep South. Racism has and forever been one of the most controversial topics, especially during the year 2020 with the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement, not only in the United States, but around the world as well. Some of the two main effects of racism can cause trauma and social isolation. Racism has been a part of human history since the start of time. The effects of historical trauma are transmitted even as the structure that created them remains in place. Trauma is sadly an universal experience that happens in every community within every group. Youth especially experience racism directly according to the article Reaching Teens. It states, "I'm multiracial, so I've received racism from a lot. Black people won't accept me because I have white people assets, and white people won't accept me because I look black. 19-year-old black young woman." Discrimination is a trauma itself. One that deeply hurts is knowing that people aren't getting treated the same just as because of their skin color. Many kids and teens notice a different treatment as they grow older. They experience distinctly different realities because of the color of their skin. People, even yourself, at some point in life become prejudiced in which we look for what benefits us only. By social isolating, people create a safe environment in which they feel secure expressing themselves. Children and teens are especially vulnerable because their development and growth depends on social interaction and support that comes upon. Any minimal action done wrong may cause the teens and kids to isolate. This can definitely include racism. In the article Reaching Teens, it mentions that the environment that children grow up in depends whether or not they create a safe environment. One of the many tasks of adolescence is to establish critical aspects of identity. Forces can either create tension and deliver toxic levels of stress or build resilience and other strengths, meaning that when youths grow, most of them are taught to express themselves wherever they are. On the other hand, some are not taught to have their beliefs, which then leads them to create a safe space for themselves in order to escape the capsule built inside of them. The researchers state in Researching Teens, when children and adolescents suffer from exposure to trauma or from a lack of the nurturant, protective force of connected adults, it may affect their bodies, brains, and behaviors. Box 42.1 Trauma has no color. This evidence states that adolescents suffer from lack of support coming from people around them. It has come to the attention of many that racism is poisoning our society. Our future generation should focus on accepting others whether it comes to ethnicity, gender, and decisions. Would you keep this generation the same, or do you rather see a better future?
Hi everyone, it's Melissa Hosick, host of the Reclaiming the Lost Souls podcast. I hope you have enjoyed the season. After looking back, there's something that kept coming up in each interview that I had. Whether on microphone or off, all those I interviewed talked about how attending a recitation impacted them and their desire to help share this story. I think Tony and Jean Armstead said it best in episode 1.
The recitation of names is very powerful. If you can imagine, sort of related to what goes on in New York City on 9/11 each year to commemorate those who were lost in 2001. Just speaking the names and putting that memory out there for people, there's a feeling attached to it, and making sure that these people are not forgotten is what the bottom line of our project is.
We make sure that their names are spoken at least once a year.
So I would be remiss without adding a recitation here. Last year's was a little windy outside, so capturing these names and reclaiming them here with you is something that I just have to do. It's time to say their names. And thank you for listening.
The victims. 137 African Americans kidnapped into permanent slavery. We will not let history forget them. We reclaim their names here. First group sent south on March 10th, 1818, aboard the Mary Ann, 39. Peter, 15. Simon, age unknown, a free person. Margaret Coven, age unknown, a free person. Sarah, 21. Deanna, 7 months. Rachel, 22. Regina, 6 weeks. Hager, 29. Rhoda, 14. Mary, 2. Augustus, 4. Flora, 23. Susan, 7 months. Harry, 14. James, 21. Elmira, 14. George, 16. Susan Watt, 35. Moses, 16. Lydia, 18. Betty, 22. Patty, 22. Bass, 19. Christine, 27. Deanna, 9. Dorcas, 1. Clarice, 22. Hercules, 2. Lydia, 22. Deanna, 9. Dorcas, 1. Clarice, 22. Hercules, 2. Lydia, 22. Harriet Jane, 3. Bob, Rosanna, Klaus, Anne, Rosino, child. Jeanette, Charles, child. Elias, child. Robert, child.
Second group, aboard the ship the Thorn, departed May 25th, 1818. Lita, age 21. Dorcas, 16. Sam Johnson, 32. Margaret, 21. Jane, 25. John, 4. Mary Davis, 23. Phyllis, 25. Charles, 1. Jack, 16. Harvey, 22. Eliza, 19. Frank, 21. Hester, 18. Peter, 21. Susan Sylvie, 30. Jacob, 18 months. Betsy, 22. Jonas, 16, a free person. Sam, 16. William, 22. Henry, 21. Amy, 22. Judah, 26. Samuel, 2. James, 22. Sam, 32. George Bryan, 18. Hannah, 16. Nancy, 22. Joseph, 2 days. Peter, 17, a free person. Hannah, 14. Jack Daniele, 21. Joseph, 2 days. Peter, 17, a free person. Hannah, 14. Jack Daniele, 21. Jude, unknown age. Caroline, 18. Anne, 18. Jeanette, 12. Mose, age unknown.
Third group, departed in mid-October, overland through Pennsylvania, 1818, 12. George, 35. Kane, 22. Frank, 21. Mary, 27. Law, 21. Phoebe, 21, a free person. Susan, 23. Charles, 43. Pettis, 14.
The following slave manifest was made of the smuggled victims aboard the ship the Shahari, the 26th of October, 1818, from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. William M. Clare, age 25. John C. Marsh, age unknown. Jafe Manning, 21. Robert Cook, 17. Ben Morris, 22. Sam Prince, 19. Sam Peter, 30. George Phillips, 18. James Thompson, age unknown. Edward Gilbert, age 22. Dan Francis, 20. James, 15. Charles, 19. Susan Wilcox, 36. Nellie, 18. Betsy Lewis, 28. Jane Clarkson, 23. Eliza Thompson, 21. Jane Cook, 15. Ann Moore, 29. Julian Jackson, 21. Jane Smith, 33. Peggy Boss, 21. Mary Harris, 21. Sally Cross, 20. Rosanna Cooper, 22. Mary Simmons, 18. Hannah Jackson, 18. Hannah Kryger, 18. Harriet Silas, 15. Fanny Thompson, 14. Elizabeth Ann Turner, 16. Susan Jackson, 20. Hannah Johnson, 20. Hannah, 18. Kane, 22. William Stone, who was consigned to John C. Marsh, age unknown. Jack, 22. Lewis, 22. Peter, 14. Frank, 21. Caleb Groves, 50. John, 21. Collins, 35. Othello, 16. Anthony Fortune, 21. Joseph Hendricks, 19. Jane, 21. Joseph Hendricks, 19. Jane, 23. Susan, 21. Lena, 38. Anthony Fortune, 21. Joseph Hendricks, 19. Jane, 23. Susan, 21. Lena, Anthony Fortune, 21. Joseph Hendricks, 19. Jane, 23. Susan, 21. Lena, 38.
Thank you to
Josephine Duque Dominique
and Barry Schwartzstein
for helping us to reclaim their names.